The pharmaceutical manufacturing facility appeared legitimate, located in an industrial zone with other chemical processing plants and manufacturing operations, proper business registration, environmental permits, safety certifications. The company claimed to produce generic medications for international markets. Export documentation showed shipments to distributors in developing countries where affordable medications were desperately needed. But FDA investigators had been tracking a disturbing pattern: counterfeit medications appearing in supply chains across 3 continents. The fake drugs looked identical to legitimate products: same packaging, same labeling, same lot numbers. But laboratory analysis revealed they contained no active ingredients. Sugar pills and binding agents designed to look like real medications while providing zero therapeutic benefit. The consequences were catastrophic. Cancer patients taking counterfeit chemotherapy drugs that contained no actual treatment. Their conditions worsened while they believed they were receiving care. Diabetics using fake insulin that failed to regulate blood sugar, resulting in medical emergencies and deaths. Antibiotic counterfeits that allowed infections to progress untreated. The death toll was measured in hundreds, potentially thousands when accounting for unreported cases in regions with limited medical infrastructure. Tracing the supply chain proved difficult. The counterfeit medications moved through complex distribution networks. Legitimate wholesalers unknowingly mixed them with real products. Pharmacies dispensed them believing they were authentic. Patients had no way to detect the fraud until the medications failed to work. But forensic analysis of the counterfeit pills revealed manufacturing signatures, specific binding agents, particular color dyes, packaging materials with traceable sources. The FDA worked backward through suppliers. Who sold the packaging materials? Where did the binding agents come from? What facilities had the equipment necessary to produce pills that mimicked legitimate medications so precisely? The investigation identified 7 possible manufacturing locations across 4 countries. Most were ruled out through inspection or investigation. But one facility, the pharmaceutical plant in the industrial zone, showed concerning patterns. Purchase orders for materials that didn't match their declared production volume. Utility consumption suggesting 24-hour operations when their licensing only covered limited production. Export records showing shipments to distributors known to be associated with counterfeit medication networks. Undercover investigators posed as potential buyers seeking bulk generic medications for international distribution. The facility's sales representatives offered products at prices far below legitimate generic manufacturers. When questioned about the low cost, they claimed efficient production methods and direct factory pricing. But the prices were too low. Even the most efficient operations couldn't produce real medications at those rates. The pricing only made sense if the products contained no expensive active pharmaceutical ingredients. Financial intelligence revealed suspicious transactions. The facility received payments from distributors but also from shell companies in jurisdictions known for money laundering. The revenue exceeded what their legitimate sales could generate. Additional income was flowing through the business from sources that had nothing to do with pharmaceutical manufacturing. The breakthrough came from immigration enforcement. A woman who had been working at the facility on a temporary visa sought help from a community organization. She was terrified but desperate. She described being recruited for pharmaceutical manufacturing work with promises of legal employment and good wages. Upon arrival, she was taken to the facility and told the real situation. The operation produced counterfeit medications. No active ingredients, just pills designed to look identical to real drugs. She was a trained pharmacist in her home country. Her expertise was valuable for ensuring the counterfeits matched legitimate products precisely. But she wasn't free to leave. Her passport had been confiscated. She was told her visa status would be reported as fraudulent if she tried to escape. She lived on site in dormitory-style housing with other workers. All were trapped in the same situation. She had witnessed the scale. Millions of pills produced monthly. packaged to match legitimate brands, shipped to distributors who would mix them into supply chains where they would reach patients who desperately needed real medication. She knew people would die. She couldn't live with the guilt. She risked everything to seek help. Her testimony provided specifics. The facility had 2 sections. The front area processed legitimate generic medications in small volumes to maintain licensing and provide cover. The back area, hidden behind locked doors marked as restricted production zones, manufactured the counterfeits on an industrial scale. Workers were held on site, prevented from leaving, forced to produce fake medications under threat of deportation or worse. Federal warrants were obtained immediately. But the tactical challenge was significant. The facility was large, multiple buildings, chemical processing equipment that could be hazardous if not properly secured, unknown number of workers who might be victims rather than willing participants. And time was critical. The woman who came forward reported that a major shipment was being prepared for distribution within 72 hours. The shipment scale was enormous. 2 million pills, cancer medications, antibiotics, diabetes treatments, all counterfeit, all destined for markets where patients trusted they were receiving real medications that would save their lives. If that shipment reached distribution, the death toll would be catastrophic. Tactical planning required coordination. DEA had jurisdiction over controlled substances and pharmaceutical fraud. FDA provided expertise on drug manufacturing. Immigration enforcement was involved because of the forced labor allegations. Local SWAT teams would execute the entry. Hazmat specialists prepared for chemical safety. Medical teams stood ready to evaluate workers who might need immediate care. The raid was executed at dawn. Multiple entry points secured simultaneously. The facility's main gates were breached. Loading docks where shipments departed were controlled. Emergency exits were blocked. Within minutes, the entire complex was isolated. The front section of the facility appeared normal. Standard pharmaceutical manufacturing equipment. Workers in clean room suits following proper production protocols. Small batches of legitimate generic medications being processed. Everything matched the facility's licensing and appeared compliant. But access to the back section was restricted. Reinforced doors with biometric locks, security cameras monitoring the entrance, warning signs about authorized personnel only. The tactical team bypassed the security using override codes obtained through the warrant. The doors opened to reveal a completely different operation. The back section was a full-scale counterfeit production facility. Industrial pill presses running continuously. Packaging equipment churning out boxes and bottles with fraudulent labels. Pallets stacked with finished products ready for shipment. And workers, dozens of them, operating the machinery under the supervision of security personnel who were clearly there to enforce compliance rather than ensure safety. The tactical entry was overwhelming. SWAT teams swept through the production floor, weapons ready, commands echoing over the machinery noise. Workers stopped operating equipment and raised their hands. Security personnel were identified and detained. Within minutes, the production floor was secured, but the scope became clear quickly. This wasn't a small operation. The back section occupied 3 full buildings connected by enclosed walkways. The first building handled production, mixing powders, pressing pills, applying coatings. The second building managed packaging, printed materials, bottles, boxes, shrink wrapping. The third building was storage and shipping, pallets of finished counterfeit medications awaiting distribution, and then tactical teams found the dormitories. 2 buildings adjacent to the production facilities. Converted warehouse space divided into small rooms. Each room housed 2 to 4 workers. Communal bathrooms, a cafeteria area. But the doors were locked from the outside. The windows were barred. This wasn't employee housing. It was confinement. 27 people were found in the dormitories. 18 women and 9 men. All had been recruited from overseas with promises of pharmaceutical industry employment. All had arrived expecting legitimate work with proper visas and compensation. All discovered the truth only after arrival. The work was producing counterfeit medications, their documents were confiscated, and they were not free to leave. They had been there for varying periods. Some arrived 3 months earlier. Others had been held for over a year. They worked 12-hour shifts producing fake medications. They knew the products would kill people. They knew cancer patients would believe they were receiving treatment while actually getting sugar pills. They carried immense guilt but had no way to escape or report the operation without risking deportation, violence, or worse. Medical teams evaluated all 27. Most showed signs of malnutrition despite regular meals. The food provided was minimal and low quality. Several had untreated injuries from industrial accidents. The facility provided no proper safety training and workers were injured by machinery but given no medical care. One woman had a chemical burn on her arm from spilled solvents. A man had a partially healed fracture from falling while moving heavy equipment. The production facility was secured and shut down. The machinery was documented and preserved as evidence. The finished counterfeit medications, over 2 million pills ready for shipment, were seized. The packaging materials, printing equipment, and everything used to create fraudulent labels matching legitimate pharmaceutical brands was confiscated. Chemical analysis teams examined the counterfeit products. The pills contained no active pharmaceutical ingredients. None. Cancer medications that should contain expensive chemotherapy compounds contained only starch and food coloring. Antibiotics that should kill bacterial infections contained binding agents that would do nothing to fight disease. Diabetes medications that should regulate blood sugar contained substances that would have zero therapeutic effect. The shipment scheduled for that week would have entered distribution chains in 6 countries. Based on the types of medications counterfeited, epidemiologists calculated potential impact. The fake cancer drugs alone, if distributed and used by patients believing they were receiving real treatment, could result in over 300 deaths as patients' conditions progressed untreated. The antibiotics could kill 50 to 100 people who would develop severe infections believing they were being properly medicated. The diabetes medications could cause dozens of medical emergencies and deaths from uncontrolled blood sugar. Conservative estimates suggested the single shipment, if distributed, would directly cause between 400 and 600 deaths. And the facility had been operating for 18 months. Previous shipments had already reached markets. The actual death toll from this one counterfeit operation likely numbered in the thousands. The facility's operators were arrested. The owner was located at his residence and taken into custody. The production managers, 3 individuals who oversaw the counterfeit manufacturing, were arrested on site. The security personnel who enforced the forced labor were detained. In total, 11 people directly involved in operating the facility faced federal charges. Financial records seized from the facility's offices revealed the scope. The operation generated approximately $15 million annually in revenue from counterfeit medication sales. Production costs were minimal. No expensive active ingredients, cheap labor through forced workers, basic materials for pills and packaging. Profit margins exceeded 90%. The buyers were identified through seized communications and shipping records. Distributors in multiple countries who purchased the counterfeits knowing they were fake, then mixed them into legitimate supply chains to increase their profit margins. Some buyers were knowingly trafficking in deadly fakes. Others may have been deceived, believing they were purchasing legitimate generic medications at discount prices. International cooperation began immediately. Law enforcement in 6 countries were notified about distributors who had received the counterfeit medications. Raids were coordinated to seize products before they could be dispensed to patients. Public health warnings were issued alerting medical professionals and patients about specific lot numbers that had been identified as counterfeit. Some of the previous shipments had already been distributed and consumed. Investigators worked to track patients who had received the fake medications. Oncologists were notified that some patients' chemotherapy might have been counterfeit, explaining why treatments appeared to fail. Diabetics who had experienced unexplained blood sugar issues were informed their insulin might have been fake. The notification process was devastating, telling patients that medications they trusted had been fraudulent. The 27 workers found in the dormitories were classified as trafficking victims. They had been recruited through deception, held against their will, and forced to work in dangerous conditions producing products that would kill people. Immigration status was protected. They would not be deported for visa violations or for the work they were forced to perform. Instead, they received victim services and legal assistance. Medical care addressed immediate health issues: malnutrition, untreated injuries, chemical exposure symptoms from working in the production facility without proper safety equipment. Psychological counseling began for trauma, the guilt of knowing their forced labor produced medications that would kill people, the fear and stress of confinement, the violation of being trafficked through fraudulent recruitment. Their testimony was critical for prosecution. They described the recruitment process, the promises made, the reality upon arrival, how documents were confiscated, how they were confined to the dormitories, how security personnel monitored them constantly, how they were threatened with violence if they refused to work or tried to escape, how they were forced to produce millions of counterfeit pills knowing people would die. The facility owner faced charges including conspiracy to traffic counterfeit medications, forced labor, human trafficking, fraud, and multiple counts of reckless endangerment. Federal prosecutors argued that knowingly producing fake medications that would be used by critically ill patients constituted reckless endangerment, even though the deaths would occur far from the production facility. The legal theory was untested, but prosecutors believed the egregiousness of the crime warranted aggressive charging. The trial revealed the operation's callousness. Communications between the owner and distributors discussed the counterfeit nature of the product openly. No actives maximum profit margin appeared in emails. When a distributor reported that patients had died after using the fake medications, the owner's response was clinical. Unfortunate but unconnected to our business. The owner showed no remorse. His defense argued he simply manufactured pills to specification provided by buyers. If those buyers chose to market them fraudulently, that wasn't his responsibility. But the evidence showed he knew. Marketing materials he provided to buyers specifically highlighted the product's similarity to legitimate medications. Pricing was structured around the cost savings from eliminating expense. The conviction was total. The owner received a life sentence. The production managers got 30 to 40 years. The security personnel who enforced forced labor received 20 to 25 years. The buyers identified through seized records faced charges in their own jurisdictions. Several were arrested. Others remained at large but under investigation. The 27 freed workers faced long recovery. Some chose to return to their home countries once assured of safe repatriation. Others applied for immigration status in the United States through trafficking victim protections. All required ongoing support: medical care, counseling, financial assistance during transition periods. The pharmaceutical industry implemented enhanced security measures. Verification systems to ensure medications in supply chains were authentic. Random testing of products even from apparently legitimate sources. Investigation protocols when patients reported medications that didn't seem effective. The case demonstrated how sophisticated counterfeit operations could produce products nearly indistinguishable from real medications. Regulatory reforms addressed the vulnerabilities the facility had exploited. Enhanced oversight of pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities. Requirements for unannounced inspections. Verification that workers were employed voluntarily with proper documentation. Monitoring of production volumes to ensure they matched licensed capacity. The reforms aimed to prevent similar operations from hiding behind legitimate manufacturing licenses. The industrial zone where the facility operated faced scrutiny. How had a counterfeit operation functioned for 18 months without detection? The answer revealed gaps in oversight. Industrial facilities had minimal monitoring as long as they maintained proper permits and passed scheduled inspections. The legitimate front operation satisfied inspection requirements, while the hidden counterfeit production operated behind locked doors that inspectors never accessed. Community awareness increased. Workers at other industrial facilities were educated about signs of forced labor. Anonymous reporting mechanisms were established. Chemical suppliers were asked to monitor purchase patterns that might indicate counterfeit pharmaceutical production. The goal was creating vigilance that would make it harder but for the tactical teams, the memory remained vivid. The production facility running at full capacity, churning out millions of fake pills. The dormitories where 27 people had been held, forced to work producing medications that would kill. The shipping area where 2 million counterfeit pills were staged, the raid stopped it. 72 hours before the shipment. 2 million pills that would have entered supply chains in 6 countries. 400 to 600 deaths prevented from that single shipment alone. And the operation was shut down permanently, preventing future production of counterfeits that had already killed thousands. The facility is demolished now. The buildings that housed the counterfeit production and worker dormitories are gone. The site is vacant, awaiting environmental remediation to address chemical contamination from improper disposal practices. Eventually, it will be redeveloped, but the history will be documented. A memorial to the victims who died from counterfeit medications and recognition of the workers who were freed. The 27 people found in the dormitories carry permanent impact. The trauma of confinement. The guilt of knowing their forced labor produced deadly products. The violation of being recruited through lies and trapped in forced labor. Some struggle with the memories. Others have found ways to cope and move forward. All received support, but healing from trafficking is a long process. The raid saved them. 72 hours before a massive shipment. In an operation where they had been forced to produce counterfeit medications for months, knowing people were dying because of products they were forced to make. The guilt was overwhelming, even though they had no choice. Being freed meant the forced labor ended. Being classified as victims meant they weren't blamed for the deaths caused by products they had no choice but to produce. The SWAT teams had entered expecting a counterfeit pharmaceutical facility. They found that, but they also found dormitories. 27 people held in locked rooms, forced to work 12-hour shifts producing fake medications, living in confinement with no freedom to leave or report what they were being forced to do. The doors were breached. The production was stopped. The workers were freed. And 2 million counterfeit pills were seized 72 hours before they would have been shipped to distributors who would mix them into supply chains where they would reach patients who desperately needed real medications to survive. The facility had been operating for 18 months. Previous shipments had killed thousands. But the raid stopped future production. The workers were freed. The operation was dismantled. And the shipment that would have caused hundreds more deaths never left the warehouse. 72 hours. That's how close it came. 3 days before 2 million counterfeit pills entered distribution. 3 days before cancer patients, diabetics, and infection sufferers would receive medications that looked real but contained nothing that would actually treat their conditions. The tactical teams executed the warrant. The facility was secured. The counterfeit production was exposed. The forced workers were discovered and freed. And a shipment that would have killed hundreds was seized before it could leave the warehouse. The raid stopped the killing, ended the forced labor, prevented the distribution, and freed 27 people who had been trapped in an operation that forced them to participate in mass murder through counterfeit medication production while holding them prisoner in dormitories locked from the outside.